morning and welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, doing no harm to others, accepting the responsibility of our choices. Let each care for self and all will be cared for.
Wake that ass up early in the morning. The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ NV, Charlemagne the God. We are the Breakfast Club. We have Teslin Figueroa with us, and we got a special guest in the building, 2024 Republican presidential candidate, Larry Elder. Welcome, brother.
For example, the number one social problem in America, by far, is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home, married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What's happened? In the mid-'60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. You know, when I say this to people, the pushback I get is, well, there are lots of things that are going on, systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 71 years old. A young black man in that demo is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents, drownings. It's not until they get to number 4 that death is the cause. In America, 60% of the shootings, the robberies, and the homicides are committed by black people, often against other black people. Of the homicides in this country, half of them are black victims, almost all killed by other blacks. How do you explain that if it isn't for the absence of fathers? Are you prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime? I doubt it. And the go-to reaction often is poverty and systemic racism.
And we are off and running. Okay, so I just happened upon this video. I really do like the serendipity of life, where sometimes I see things and I'm just like, really? Okay, so let's check it out. And so this is kind of interesting to me. Okay, so a couple of things I want to establish. First of all, there is a lot of talk on this particular podcast with this Breakfast Club, Charlemagne the God, the DJ guy, and then this woman that comes up, along with Larry Elder. If you've never seen Larry Elder, you really are missing out on something great. He's right up there in my mind with Thomas Sowell. I've never known anybody that has command of the facts the way he does. Couple things, though, that I want to establish. One is I will put the link down below to the Breakfast Club if you want to listen to the entire podcast. It's really good. I think if you're a person that doesn't like the crosstalk and you don't like people lying, it might become irritating to you. So you'll have to kind of forego that as you listen to it. But one of the things I want to talk about is a system, because there is a lot of talk on this particular podcast about a system, about systemic racism. And, defined very cleanly that a system pertains to interdependent or interrelated objects comprising and functioning as a whole. So, yeah, I just Googled it, and that's what it comes up as. The system is the sum of all of its parts. And if you try to pull a piece out of the system, and you want to focus on just that, well, how is that any longer a system? I mean, it's a system unto itself, because then, what is it going to do in that moment? If you extract something and then you put it in its own petri dish, then it's going to create its own system, right? Okay, so a couple of things, though, that I want to establish off the bat. You have to start life by no longer seeing yourself as a victim. One of the things that various communities, the black community, the Hispanic community, any of the trans folks, gay folk, whoever they are, if you continue to see yourself as a victim before we even get started into anything, nothing will change in your life. You have to be able to look at life and say, I am no longer a victim. How am I not a victim? Because I own my choices. One of the things that various communities will not do is they will not self-evaluate and they will not self-correct. So what is it that they are doing? They're blaming everyone and everything else. They may have moments and pockets of being able to look at reality, to see reality, to even taste the reality, but they will not look at self. They will not look at themselves in the mirror. As a community, they will not stand together and go, hey, what are we doing wrong? What is it that we're doing incorrectly? What is not accurate in our understanding of what's really happening, what the reality is? Because we go back to what is reality. It is the absence of emotion in observing what is going on in front of you. And if you're emotional about it, we're done. There's no more conversation to be had. It is only until you remove yourself from that emotion that you can clearly and cleanly see that. So you have to be able to no longer see yourself as a victim. You have to be able to self-evaluate and self-correct. Then you have to be able to develop personal responsibility of your choice, and you have to develop personal accountability of outcomes. You have to own your choices, and you have to own the outcomes. So Larry has established that his thesis is that it is the absence of fathers in the home, and this is why there's all these problems in the black community. Okay, well, that may be a factor. The piece that he has not either realized or is, for whatever reason, whatever his personal thing is internally, he is not acknowledging, and that is the piece that we just talked about, accountability. It's a way when you look at it and you're listening to it, you're insulting the people that are single parents. And a person can be a single parent, male or female, for a variety of reasons. Either they chose to be a single parent, or they got into a relationship, they had a child, somebody died. I mean, there could be all kinds of reasons. But to just look at it and say, this is the inflection point, this is the flashpoint from which all other problems stem, is really, in many ways, it is not really seeing the issue as it is. And the issue is more simple than that. It is the lack of responsibility, the lack of accountability, the lack of responsibility of choice, and the lack of accountability of the outcomes and being able to respond to the outcomes.
1940, when there was blatant racism. This is before Brown versus Board of Education, before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. KKK was still alive and well. 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. Now it's about 14%. You can't blame it on poverty. You can't blame it on racism. It is the breakdown of the nuclear intact family, and neither side is talking about it. The left doesn't talk about it because they caused it with the welfare state, and our side does not talk about it because if you're white, you'll be accused of dissing single moms who are heroically raising these kids, or you'll be accused of being a racist, or if you're black, you'll be accused, as I was by the LA Times, of being the black face of white supremacy. Nobody's talking about that. I am.
What are the reasons, if your statistics are right, what are the reasons that you think fathers aren't in the home?
As I said, it's because in the mid-'60s, Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. In Charlemagne, literally, they sent social workers door to door in the inner city. I remember this. Mm-hmm. Advising women of the availability of welfare provided there was no man in the house. It created an economic incentive for women to marry the government. Same thing with whites. In 1965, 8% of whites entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Now it's about 25%, also up threefold. Look at census data, 1910, 1920, 1930, in places like Milwaukee, Chicago, Philadelphia, a young black kid was slightly more likely to be brought into a world with a father in the home married to the mother than a young white kid. We have incentivized this kind of bad behavior, and it's had a disproportionately bad effect on
One
the
of the
black
things that I always really enjoy about listening to Elder and listening to Thomas Sowell is that both of them are in command of facts and figures like nobody's business. I mean, it is absolutely amazing to me. But in this instance, I'm really, one of the reasons why I'm playing these and we're listening to it at this point is that I want to lay this groundwork for better understanding as we go further into this podcast, because he's really laying down the understanding of what is the cause of these issues that are going on in the black community. One we've already established is they are not self-reflecting and self-correcting. That's one right off the bat. The other one is they continue, not everybody, but they continue to see themselves as a victim. Then they lack the accountability and they lack the responsibility.
Let me ask you a question. What do white people do wrong, Larry Elder?
What do you mean? What do white people do? I'm not worried about white people. I'm worried about what's going on with us.
But if there's systemic racism in this country, which we know it is.
No, I don't say there is. You say there is. I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't believe there's
No,
systemic
there
racism?
used to be, obviously. Tell me what you think the number one systemic example of systemic racism is in America.
Oh man, there's so many.
Just give me the most important one you think.
At the top of mind, I'd probably maybe say mass incarceration. Maybe.
Really? During the Great Depression, when 50% of black adults were unemployed, you didn't have this kind of mass incarceration. It's the breakdown of the family.
I'm not going to. I agree with the family part. I'm a black man who is a father to his children, and I'm a happily married black man to a black woman. So I'm never going to argue with that part, But I just feel like everything is black with you. Black is wrong. Black people do this and black people do that. And when I ask you what white people do wrong, you said you're not worried about white people at all.
I'm talking about the damage, disproportionate damage going on in the black community. For example.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out pretty quickly. Charlemagne has a view of the world. He filters the world that there is systemic racism. He even mentions it. He says it as though it's just common knowledge. This is a tactic by a lot of people. It doesn't matter whatever their political party is, but they say things in such a way that everybody knows it. It's just common knowledge. It's common sense. These are the things that everyone believes, right? We don't believe anything. We don't think it, but we know it. And in his mind, he thinks he knows, which is a very interesting twist of words, that there is systemic racism. And he starts off this particular segment by saying, what do white people do wrong? What he has already decided is that white people do things wrong, and now he wants to instigate an argument with Larry about seeing whether or not Larry has anything to confess or to subjugate to with regard to what white people do. Now, again, this is another tactic to distract people from the reality. And even though Larry says, I'm not worried what white people do, what might have been a really good response to Charlemagne would be, listen, it's not about focusing on other people. It's about focusing on you. The greatest thing that you can do for self, for your family, is to focus on you, on your own personal development. The healthier you get with your own personal development, the healthier your children will be. The healthier your neighborhood will be. The healthier your community will be. Your city, your state. It like the pebble in the lake, right? When it goes in and it plops in the middle and the ripples out. That's how this works. Now listen, I didn't make it up. I just observed it. You can observe it for yourself. You can decide whether or not you want to know this, or you can decide just to ignore it. Again, that's a choice. But what Charlemagne is doing in a manipulative way is he's trying to set up Elder so that he goes down a path of trying to justify and rationalize behavior which never is going to work, right? Because everybody has some self-evaluation and some self-correction to do. But he's also not understanding that all of these things that are happening are a result of people not taking responsibility. Life is not happening to you. It's happening because of you. This is a really important point. If this is something that you've heard me say over and over again, I can't emphasize it enough. Life does not happen to you. These things that go on in your life are happening because of the choices you make. You make a choice to walk out the door, to walk down the hallway, to get into an elevator, to go downstairs. All of these choices have a risk. There is nothing without a risk. Even if you wanted to lay in bed all day and not do, okay, I'm not going to move. I'm going to lay in bed. There's a risk to doing that because all kinds of physical things will happen to you over time by not doing anything. Not making a choice is making a choice. So when you're listening to this, if you want to go back and listen to it again, you can hear where Charlemagne is trying to set him up. What do white people do wrong? And there's systemic racism. Well, okay, so that's your filter. But does the reality reflect what you're emotionally looking at? And of course, Elder is so great about bringing the receipts.
When you say, what do white people do? I mean, this is a country that has struggled mightily to get over its historic racism. There was a civil war. There was a big civil rights movement. This is the only majority white country that's ever elected a black president, let alone reelected a black president. The three biggest cities in America are New York, Chicago, L.A. They all have black mayors, even though no city has a majority of black population. The president of Harvard is a black female. Martin Luther King in 1966, Charlemagne, gave an interview to the BBC. This is 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64 got passed. And he said, I'm amazed at how many positive changes there have been in America in the last 2 years. Why, if things keep going like this, we could have a black president in about 40 years' time. Mm-hmm. Do the math. Right on cue, Barack Obama elected 2008. He didn't say there'll be a black female president of Harvard, and there has been. He didn't say there are going to be black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and there have been several. He didn't say the percentage of the House would equal the percentage of black people in the population, and it does. He didn't say the three largest cities would have black mayors, and they do. He didn't say the largest and most prestigious organization of doctors, the American Medical Association, would have 2 black presidents, and there have been. He didn't say the most prestigious organization of lawyers, the American Bar Association, would have 2 black presidents, and they have. He said president, meaning at that point, I can feel that I've reached the mountaintop, which is the speech he gave right before he got assassinated the day before. And now we act as if Barack Obama never even got elected. And we're still talking about systemic racism. It's not fair. It's wrong. And you're discouraging black people from working hard.
Again, Elder really brings the receipts. He's got command of the facts and figures, even the quotes. I mean, this guy's knowledge is amazing. He's 71 years old. He doesn't look it. He's got good genes that way. But he also is able to speak to these things in such a way that I think, when I watch him, I mean, such command of everything that I think it's impressive. For me, it is. It's very impressive. Knowledge is impressive to me. And the more a person has, the more impressive it can be. It's like, wow, there's no end to the height or the breadth of knowledge that a person can have. This next piece, I will comment on it before we wrap up this week's podcast, and I will continue this next week because there are some really enriching moments during this hour that they spoke to one another.
1996.
Okay. Mr. Elder, quick question. Let's just remove the word racism, since that seems to be a word that triggers, a conversation down the water hole. Let's just focus on the word system. You mentioned that the system was the one that discouraged. And again, we have no problem with agreeing that the family, the black family, should certainly has some room for some improvement. But let's just focus on system.
Room for improvement?
System. Well, we're not going to go down that water. We're not going to go down that water hole. Let's get to the question. So the question is, you said that the system encouraged black women to be single mothers, correct?
I said the welfare state, yes.
The welfare, the system. So who's in charge of the system? Who was in charge of the system?
Well, it was Democrats that passed it.
And who were Democrats? Were they black or white at that time?
Well, at the time, majority of black people were Democrats, as the majority of black people are Democrats now.
Not the voters. I'm talking about the system. Remember, the main idea is the word system. Who was in charge of the system at the time? The Democrats at the time, the system. I'm just going to Charlamagne's point about white or black. Was it white Democrats in charge of the system or black Democrats in charge of the system?
Well, if you're prepared to say that Lyndon Johnson did this viciously with an intent to destroy the black family, I disagree. He did it with the best of intentions. And if you look at the New York Times, which is left wing, the Washington Post, which is left wing, they cheered all of this.
Right. And what I'm asking, was it white people? So I'm going to ask again in case my mic's not coming through clearly. Was it white people in charge of the system or black people in charge of that system that helped break down the black family? It's a simple yes, just a simple question, white or black?
Well, you didn't have to go on welfare unless you voluntarily chose to go on welfare. The inducement was put there by Democrats, by the left.
Correct. Okay. Democrats,
most black people were Democrats, and they voted for these white people.
Not
too.
Voters. I said who's in charge of the system.
Well, who put them in charge?
Was Lyndon Johnson white or black?
Who put them in charge?
Maybe that'll help you.
Fine. Lyndon Johnson was white.
Thank you.
Okay. But if your argument is that the reason he did it is because of racism, then I disagree. He did it because of
That's not my argument. I just asked you a simple question. Was he white or black? Charlamagne?
And
So if you're not annoyed by this woman, you will be next week by the time I get through the second part of this. But a couple of things. First of all, Larry talks about the best of intentions. He doesn't know that. He can't get into the head of Lyndon Johnson and know. There has been evidence on both sides to say that he thought very little of the black people and the black community, and it was not good. So I'm going to set that aside, but just so you know, that's another slight manipulation from people when they are trying to ease the conversation or they're trying to find a way to credential what they want to say. Now, she immediately wants to go into race, and then, of course, she tries to insult him. Is there something wrong with my mic? I actually had a client say that to me when I was on a Zoom call, and I kept talking, and when I got done, that was part of the conversation was, I could swear my mic was on. I said, yes, but I was speaking. And what I was letting that individual know was, it's not okay for you. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not okay for you to keep interrupting me because you're trying to bully, right? Which is what she was trying to do. And then she goes into wanting to insult. Now, her thing is, she wants to find out in the system. She will not take responsibility. She will not apply responsibility and accountability for the fact that the collective had voted for the people that are in the system. Listen, if you're having a problem with the system and you want to blame the system, well, then blame the people that are the ones that voted them in. And Elder lays it out right there. It's like, okay, the majority of the people that voted for all of them were black. But she doesn't want to own it. Why? Because she's already filtered the world. She sees herself as a victim, and she's already filtered the world through the fact that were these people white or black? Because in her mind, that's all there is. It's white or black. It's like, no, it's about accountability and responsibility, and you don't want to take accountability and responsibility for the fact that your community of which you are a part are the ones that voted these people in. If you don't like the system, it's because you created the system. And that's what's interesting about this discussion, this debate, is people don't want to own that aspect of it. There seems to be a failure to remember or a deliberate avoidance of reality and history because they don't want to take ownership of it. Why don't they want to take ownership of it? What is going on that makes them avoid ownership? Because they don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to be accountable. And then gaslighting people who already see themselves as a victim is like giving them a hit of a drug called victimization. Listen, when all you do is respond by emotion and not factual evidence, which should reflect a reality which helps you self-evaluate and pivot, how will you ever get to your own state of health in your mind and body? If you are so focused on that and you cannot focus on anything else, there's no discussion to be had. There's no way you could logically help or support a person into understanding the reality when they don't want the reality. They want to gaslight the whole thing. They want to be emotional about the whole thing. They don't want the reality because they already have the disease. And the disease is, I see myself as a victim and I am not willing to get out of it. I am not willing to take accountability. I'm not willing to be responsible. And as a result, I'm going to blame everyone and everything else. And yet this woman is stupid because she's not making the connection that Elder laid out for her. Look, these are black people that voted for these white people. What else do you want to have happen? And throughout the whole thing, if you watch it before next week's podcast, you'll see she never comes to that understanding. She never has an epiphany to it. And, she probably should get off carbs. And that music means once again we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this weekend. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're really getting something out of it. Hey, you know what? Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them change their perspective. Hit that like button if you would. And if you're interested, my book is at lulu.com. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. I'll see you next week.